Welcome to the debate. You know, buying a property in Spain it's often sold as this dream come true. We all hear about the retirement villa in the sun, that apartment with the perfect sea view, the connection to nature. But I think for anyone who has actually gone through it, it feels a lot more like a collision between that big romantic dream and the unyielding, often brutal reality of physics, bureaucracy, and construction.
It is the critical juncture, isn't it? And right in the middle of that collision is the property inspection. That's the moment where the rubber meets the road, or I suppose where the damp meets the drywall.
Exactly. And the question we're really digging into today is one of philosophy as much as it is methodology. We're looking at a market that shifted, dramatically, from a sort of handshake culture to a very data-driven industry. But has that shift actually solved the buyer's real problem? Does a better inspection just mean more data? Higher res drones, longer checklists, more automated reports? Or does it require something else, a return to a more human, consulting-based approach?
And I'm going to stop you right there on human approach, because I'll be arguing that we just cannot let the romance of the purchase get in the way of the absolute necessity of rigorous, standardized technical data. The evolution of the Spanish market toward these high-tech, objective, point-based reports it's a huge win for transparency. Efficiency and standardization are the only real ways to protect the average buyer from sinking their money into a disaster.
And I'm going to be representing the view that while that technical rigor is the baseline, it's definitely not the ceiling. I'm arguing for the holistic approach, what the source material calls the iNMOspector philosophy. I believe that treating a home as just a system of components fundamentally fails the specific client who wants solutions, who wants renovation advice, and who wants a relationship, not just a big catalog of defects.
Well, let's get into it, because I think we need to start by just acknowledging how far the industry has actually come. The source material itself highlights this massive evolution. 10, 15 years ago, buying in Spain was the Wild West. You might have had a local builder walk through, kick a few things, maybe tap a wall, and just say, it's fine. Today, we're looking at a standardized industry. We're talking about reports that assess anywhere from 170 to 300 specific inspection points.
Oh, I don't dispute the volume of data. The sheer quantity of information available now it's completely unprecedented. And let's be absolutely clear right from the start. The standardized, high-tech inspection is technically valid. The source material says that explicitly. These reports demonstrate a high level of professional competence. We are not saying these inspections are bad.
I'm glad you concede that, because when I look at the modern standard, I see structure. I see a system. These reports break a property down into its essential parts: structure, the envelope, installations, comfort, and safety. They use color-coded risk levels, red for urgent, amber for caution. They use thermal cameras to find heat loss or water ingress that the naked eye would completely miss, drones to inspect roof tiles you can't even get to. This isn't just gathering info. This is raising the entire floor of professional competence for the whole market. If I'm a buyer, surely I want the maximum number of objective data points to make sure I'm not buying a nightmare.
Objective is the key word there, and that's exactly where I want to push back. You're describing a product that is, yes, technically valid, but the question isn't whether the data is accurate. The question is whether it's sufficient for a human being who's making, a life-altering decision. A checklist, whether it has 170 points or 300, is binary. It asks, is the wall cracked? Yes or no. It does not ask, does this particular crack matter to the person who's buying this house?
But the crack exists regardless of the buyer. That is the entire point of objectivity. If I start tailoring my report to what I think the buyer wants to hear, I'm not an inspector anymore. I'm an enabler. The wall doesn't care about your feelings.
Let me give you a really concrete example. A standard report might flag a rising damp issue in a ground floor partition wall as a red flag high cost. Okay, technically, that's accurate. There is damp. It will cost money to fix. But what if the buyer's whole plan is to knock that wall down to create a big, open-plan kitchen?
Then may knock it down.
Exactly. But the report has just given them a heart attack over a red flag that is completely irrelevant to their vision. A holistic consultant, on the other hand, says, look, don't worry about that wall. You're demolishing it anyway. But see the floor level? If you remove that wall, you'll have a gap in the tiling that won't match anything else in the house. That's your real problem. You see the difference? A checklist generates anxiety. A consultant generates strategy.
That sounds appealing, I'll admit it. But it also introduces what I see as a dangerous level of subjectivity. You're asking the inspector to be a fortune teller. The strength of the standardized model is that it treats the building like a machine. It evaluates the system of components. A building is a system, hydraulic, electrical, structural. If you don't evaluate those components in isolation, you are going to miss the details.
A building is a system of components. A home is an environment. And for the clients we're talking about, people who want more than just a pass-fail grade, that distinction is everything.
It sounds a little like semantics to me.
4K images. The AI, or the inspector, notes 15% of tiles are slipped. Recommended action, repair. Okay, that's the standardized output. The buyer reads this and thinks, right, I need to hire a roofer for a day.
Which is useful information.
It's data, but is it wisdom? A holistic consultant who is looking at the viability of the home might look at those exact same tiles and say, yes, they are slipped, but this roof structure is 100 years old. It's using cane and mud underlay. You cannot simply patch this. If you touch that 15%, the vibration will cause the rest to slide. You are not looking at a repair. You're looking at a full structural replacement of the roof.
Okay, but I would argue that a competent technical architect performing a standard inspection would note the age and the materials. The modern standard isn't just some robot ticking boxes. These are qualified professionals.
They are qualified, absolutely. But are they incentivized to look that deep? Or are they incentivized to get through the checklist? The source material makes a really interesting point about this idea of efficiency versus judgment.
And efficiency is a positive. The real estate market in Spain moves incredibly fast. In popular areas like the Costa del Sol or the Balearics, properties are listed and sold in a matter of days. The standardized model I'm defending is built for that kind of speed. It uses apps, client portals, automated reporting. It can turn around a comprehensive technical audit in 48 hours.
Experience is not measured in points per hour. That is a direct quote from the analysis.
But speed is a form of value. If I can give a buyer a complete picture of the property's health before they even sign the reservation contract, I'm giving them a huge competitive advantage. The holistic, consulting-heavy approach you're advocating for, where we all sit down and discuss feelings and future plans, that takes time, and that time might cost them the deal.
And efficiency that replaces judgment might cost them their peace of mind. The drive for points per hour, it creates a kind of factory mindset. The inspector comes in, follows the protocol, flies the drone, checks the sockets, and leaves. They're optimizing for the report generation, not for the client's understanding. Real judgment takes standing in the room time. It takes looking at a crack and wondering, why is that there? Not just measuring it.
But surely a standardized protocol ensures that the inspector doesn't miss things. It forces them to look at every single element. It ensures consistency. If I'm running an inspection company, I need to know that my inspector in Malaga and my inspector in Valencia are checking the exact same things. That is how you build trust in a market, through reproducibility.
It ensures nothing on the list is missed, yes, but it doesn't ensure the house is understood. And this leads to the biggest gap that the source material identifies, the so what factor. This is where the iNMOspector approach really stands apart. It's for the client who's asking, okay, I see the defects, but can this house become what I imagine it to be?
Give me an example of becoming what I imagine.
Renovation potential, preservation, that trade-off between energy efficiency and character. Let's say a client falls in love with a traditional farmhouse because of its beautiful old wooden windows. A standard report, which is focused on thermal efficiency, will flag those windows as single-glazed, poor insulation, recommendation, replace.
Which is physically true, their energy leaks.
It is true, but if the client replaces them with white PVC windows, they destroy the very character they bought the house for in the first place. A holistic consultant says, okay, the data says these are inefficient, but here's a solution to restore them and add secondary glazing so you keep the look, but you also get the warmth. That's a solution. That's a second opinion on their idea.
The checklist just says fail.
I see the value in that, I do. But it sounds like you're blurring the lines between an inspector and, say, an architect or a project manager.
But for the buyer, those lines don't exist. They're buying the potential of the property. If the inspection is purely a retrospective look at what the building is, rather than a prospective look at what it could be, it's only doing half the job for a client who actually wants to renovate.
But you have to admit, that requires a very specific kind of inspector. It needs someone with deep experience in construction, not just an inspection.
Exactly. It requires judgment. And judgment is what bridges that gap between a technical report and the real world. Which brings us to the what happens next factor. In your efficiency model, what happens when the report is done?
The client gets a secure link, they download the PDF, and they have all the data they need to make a decision. Simple.
They get a 50-page document full of red warnings, and then the panic sets in. In the standard model, the relationship often ends with that PDF delivery. The holistic approach, it begins there.
Begins there?
Yes, because that is when the buyer needs continuity. They need coordination. The source mentions this specifically, coordinating with lawyers before contracts are signed.
Wait, hold on. Why is the inspector talking to the lawyer? The inspector checks bricks, the lawyer checks deeds.
Because the technical reality of the house has huge legal implications. This is so important in Spain. Let's say the standard inspection finds an enclosed terrace. The report says, enclosure not shown on original plans, non-conforming geometry.
Which is a fact.
It is a fact, but the lawyer needs to know. Is this a minor infraction that creates a theoretical risk of a fine in 10 years? Or is this a fundamental breach of urban planning laws that means the city hall could literally demand its demolition? A PDF doesn't pick up the phone and explain the nuance of urbanistic legality to the lawyer. A consultant does. That is where the checkbox fails. It can't weigh risk. It can only record its presence.
That sounds expensive. And it sounds like it blurs the lines of responsibility. But I want to pivot to the international aspect, because the source really emphasizes that so many buyers in Spain are from abroad. And this is where I think the data-driven argument is at its strongest.
I disagree, but go on.
Technical data is a universal language. A moisture reading of 80% is high in Spanish, English, or German. A thermal bridge is a thermal bridge. The standardized report with its visual evidence and its metric-based approach is actually the best tool for international buyers precisely because it minimizes the need for cultural nuance. Math is math. It translates perfectly.
You're assuming that the tolerance for that math is universal, and it's not. The source explicitly refutes this idea. It says, language is also a safety feature. This isn't just about translating the word humid to faucht. It's about translating expectations and lifestyles.
Give me a concrete example where math fails.
Construction methods. A buyer from the UK or the US might be used to timber frame construction with drywall. They come to Spain, they see a concrete beam with a hairline shrinkage crack, and they think the house is about to fall down. Or they see single-layer brick walls, and they assume it's poor quality, not realizing that's standard for that climate zone.
But a standard report explains the material, reinforced concrete structure.
But it doesn't explain the implication. Let's talk about the pool. This is a classic Spanish property issue. In many countries, if a pool is physically there, it's legal. In Spain, on rural land, there's a very high chance it is not. A standard checklist might say, pool, 8 by 4 meters, pump functioning, skimmers clean.
And that's what I want to know. Does it work?
The buyer thinks, great, a pool. The holistic consultant, knowing the cultural context of rural Spain and urbanistic legality, looks at the land classification and says, this pool is functioning, yes, but it's on protected land. You will never, ever be able to legally repair it if it cracks. You are buying a depreciating asset. That is cultural translation. That is translating technical findings into negotiation arguments.
That is a strong point, but isn't that technically the lawyer's job? Due diligence on land classification is a legal matter.
It is shared territory. But the lawyer sitting in an office in Madrid or London, the inspector is standing on the dirt. The inspector sees the proximity to the dry riverbed that might flood. They see the neighbor's wall that's encroaching on the property line. If the inspector is only looking at the checklist of the house itself, they completely miss the context of the land it sits on.
I want to push back on the business model aspect, though. We've talked about the inspection itself, but the source mentions independence.
Independence creates alignment.
Right. And my argument is that standardization guarantees independence better than a relationship-based model ever could. If I have a strict protocol, a digital workflow that forces me to photograph every room, every corner, every socket, I can't hide anything. I can't be swayed by a real estate agent winking at me or a buyer who's hoping I'll miss something so they can buy it cheaper. The data is immutable, it protects the inspector from pressure, and it protects the buyer from corruption.
I see that logic. The checklist doesn't care. But the business model behind the checklist might. If the model is volume-driven, number of inspections per month, then the real incentive is speed. The incentive is to get in, get out, deliver the PDF, and move on to the next one.
But volume brings expertise. This is the big data argument. If a standardized company does 5,000 inspections a year, they have a massive data set. They know the exact failure rate of a specific type of boiler in a specific region. That aggregate knowledge is far more powerful than the intuition of a single holistic consultant who might do 50 houses a year.
It makes them better at statistics. Does it make them better at understanding my specific fear about the damp in the basement? Knowing that 20% of boilers fail doesn't tell me why this specific boiler is making a rattling noise.
It tells me the probability of risk, which allows me to price it into my offer. That's what a buyer wants. Leverage. The report says there's a high probability of failure, so I want 2,000 euros off the price. That is a powerful transaction tool.
And that is exactly where our philosophies diverge. You see the inspection as a transactional tool, a lever to pull during a negotiation. I view it, and the iNMOspector philosophy views it, as an onboarding process for the home.
Onboarding? That's an interesting term for buying a house.
But it's accurate, isn't it? You're taking over a complex system. You need to know how to operate it. You need to know that if you want to install that solar power system you've been dreaming of, the roof orientation is all wrong, or the structure can't take the weight. A checklist doesn't ask, what do you want to do with this house? It only asks, what is this house?
I think we're circling a fundamental difference in the client profile here, and I think it's important we acknowledge that.
I agree.
Because I still maintain that for 90% of the market, people buying a standard apartment, a turnkey villa, an investment property, the standardized, high-tech, efficient inspection is a massive improvement over the past. It provides safety, it provides a baseline, and it's cost-effective.
And the source material agrees with you. It says those elements are valuable. They help buyers understand what they're buying. We are not dismissing the technological advancements. Drones are great. Thermal cameras are essential.
They're tools.
They are tools. But for the client who views the property as a project, a renovation, a restoration, a whole change of life, the checklist is just the starting line. They need the judgment, the continuity, and the translation of technical facts into life decisions.
So essentially what you're arguing for is a premium tier, the bespoke inspection.
I'm arguing for a thinking inspection, one that offers solutions. The source mentions that buyers want to know, are these cracks just cracks or are they obstacles to my renovation plans? To answer that, you have to know the renovation plans. You need a dialogue. You need a partner.
And I suppose for the client who just wants to know, is the house going to fall down, the 300-point checklist is perfectly adequate.
It is technically valid, but the holistic approach is for those who want to know, can this house rise up to meet my expectations?
So where does this leave us? I think we can agree that the Spanish market has matured, the days of the blind purchase are largely over, and that's thanks to the standardization I've been defending.
Yes, and that is a victory. But as the market matures, the needs of the buyers become more sophisticated. They don't just want data, they want wisdom. They want to know that the person inspecting their future home is looking at it with the same level of care and curiosity that they are.
I suppose there's room for both. The checklist provides the hard evidence, the undeniable reality of the bricks and mortar. The philosophy provides the narrative, the story of how the buyer will actually live there.
And perhaps the perfect inspection is one where those two things finally meet, where the checklist is rigorous, but the delivery is personal, where the what is always followed by the so what.
A fair conclusion. Though I am keeping my thermal camera. I trust the infrared more than I trust my feelings.
And I wouldn't have it any other way. But when that camera shows a cold spot, I'll be the one telling the client whether it's a drafty window or a missing insulation panel, and who they need to call to fix it.
Deal.
And that brings us to the end of this discussion. We hope this helps you look at your next property inspection not just as a hurdle to clear, but as the very first step in defining your future home.
Thanks for listening.
See you next time.